It happened on a Tuesday. I remember that because the sun was glaring, like it had something to prove, and my car's AC was wheezing like an old man at the end of his breath. I was coming back from Walgreens, just a bottle of lisinopril and a sympathy card for my neighbor whose cat had died. My son always said I fussed over the neighborhood too much, like I was still trying to mother the whole street. Maybe I was. I pulled into the driveway, my usual spot left wheel, just grazing the oil stain he never bothered to scrub off when he moved back in after college. I got out grocery bag pinched between my elbow and ribcage purse, slipping down my arm keys already in hand. The lock didn't turn. I jiggled it hard, thinking maybe the wood had swollen from the heat. I knocked with my knuckle. No answer. I bent forward, squinting at the doorknob. The brass was shinier. I noticed a faint ridge of fresh paint, like someone had removed the old plate, installed a new one, and painted just enough to make it match. I knocked again, harder this time. Still nothing. Then a voice behind me. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I turned, still gripping the bag like a shield. A man in a blue polo and cargo pants stood by the azalea bush clipboard in hand. I don't know how I hadn't seen him there. "This residence has been reassigned," he said, without blinking. I stared at him, the words taking a second to land. "I live here," I said. "This is my house." He flipped the clipboard toward me. A signature, a date, a company letterhead. My son's name. I felt my heartbeat in my throat. My mouth was suddenly dry, tongue thick, like I'd chewed aspirin. "I'm going to ask you to vacate the premises," he said. "If you need a ride, I can call someone for you." I blinked at him. I blinked at the door. My hand, still clutching the key, was trembling. I stepped back slowly, like someone walking away from a cliff edge they didn't know they were standing on. There was no car in the driveway, no lights on inside. They knew I'd be out. They waited for a Tuesday, waited for Walgreens. I backed toward the car, not even remembering how my legs moved. I dropped the sympathy card. It fluttered like a dead bird onto the walkway. The man didn't move to pick it up. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, engine off, keys limp in my hand. I watched the front door like a stranger. It didn't open. No one looked through the window. No one waved or called my name. That's when it started to hit me that I'd been erased from the very place I built, not yelled at, not argued with, just deleted. I tried to call my son, straight to voicemail. I called again, then his wife, also voicemail. I texted, "What's going on?" Nothing. "Are you home?" Nothing. "The door's locked." Still nothing. I texted my neighbor, Janine. She answered 2 minutes later. "Saw a locksmith truck this morning. Thought maybe you were upgrading security." I stared at her message for a long time. Upgrading security. Against who? The irony of it that I'd worked night shifts for decades, kept this home safe when the power went out and when the pipes burst. When the car got stolen from the driveway. When his friends used to sneak out at midnight, thinking I didn't know. I kept this house warm, even when I couldn't afford to heat the whole place. And now I was the threat. I drove, not far, just to the McDonald's by the freeway. I sat in the back corner with a cold coffee, my purse pressed to my ribs like armor. I kept checking my phone, thinking maybe he'd call. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe this was one of those overcautious security companies gone rogue. I checked the calendar. My birthday was in 2 weeks. Maybe this was some elaborate surprise. Maybe I was dreaming, but I wasn't. The last time I'd seen my son, he hugged me like his spine was made of concrete. His wife barely looked up from her phone. My granddaughter was polite but robotic. I had told myself they were just busy, that they had their own stresses. that I should be grateful they were in the same house, even if they barely looked me in the eye anymore. Now I couldn't stop thinking about all the things I hadn't seen or hadn't wanted to see. The way the bills stopped arriving in my name. How he insisted on taking over the finances to help. How he changed the cable password, the insurance login, the electricity account, piece by piece like taking threads out of a sweater. You don't feel the draft at first, not until it unravels. At around 5:40 p.m., I drove to the church parking lot and sat there until it was dark. I didn't know what I was waiting for. God, maybe, a bolt of understanding, something that would tell me this wasn't the full picture, that there was something I missed. But there wasn't. By the time I checked my messages again, there was one from his wife. Just 3 words. It's for safety. Safety, like I was a threat. I stared at the text thumb hovering over the screen, unsure if I should laugh, cry, or smash the phone against the dashboard. They changed the locks while I was picking up pills I can't afford without Medicare. Pills I started taking after I collapsed in the hallway last year and no one came home for hours. Pills they said they'd help pay for if I agreed to restructure the estate. I didn't even know what that meant. I said yes. Because when your own child says, trust me, you do. Until they don't even say that anymore. They just send a man in a polo with a clipboard. I always thought that love, real love, was about staying. Not just physically, but staying with someone's pain, their noise, their slow unraveling. That's what I did for my family. I stayed through every version of them, the tantrums, the silences, the mistakes, and even the small betrayals. I believed that sacrifice was how you paid rent on love. That was the currency I traded in for years. Back when I was 31, I had 2 toddlers and a mortgage I didn't understand. My husband, Jack, died under a half-finished roof on a job he never should have been on without scaffolding. There wasn't even a proper lawsuit, just a half-hearted settlement and a plaque with his name on it at the Union Hall. He left behind 3 things: a rusting Chevy, an overdue water bill, and the look in my son's eyes when he asked, "Is Daddy coming back?" That night, I sat on the bathroom floor and didn't sleep. I remember the tile was cracked and cold. I remember thinking, I don't know how to be everything, but I tried. I gave up the dream of going back to school for nursing admin. I stayed in the emergency room 12-hour shifts, sometimes 16. I took the night shifts no one wanted, so I could be there in the mornings to make breakfast. I learned how to fix a leaky faucet, how to read a tax form, how to say no when the insurance company wanted to drop us. I was the woman who mowed her own lawn in June, who fixed the furnace with a borrowed wrench, and YouTube before YouTube even existed. I missed PTA meetings sometimes, but I never missed their birthdays, even when it meant bringing cupcakes in a hospital uniform that smelled like antiseptic and sweat. My son, David, used to wait for me at the front window. Every night, he'd fall asleep on the rug, clutching the corner of my cardigan like a lifeline. I used to sit beside him and watch him breathe, thinking, at least he knows I came home. He was a sweet boy, sensitive, artistic, always sketching something. He once drew me as a superhero, supermom, with a cape made of stethoscopes and spatulas. I cried when he gave it to me. He said, I don't want anything to ever happen to you. That's what I held on to, even when he turned 15 and started slamming doors, even when he called me suffocating because I asked about his friends, even when he told me college was too expensive and moved back in after 2 years, tail between his legs. He always came back. That's what I told myself. He came back when he brought his wife home after their wedding, small courthouse affair I wasn't invited to. I made up the guest room, lit, a candle-baked lemon squares. I thought maybe she'd be shy. Maybe she just needed time. But she didn't want time. She wanted space. And my son gave it to her by taking mine. She didn't like that I cooked so much, said it made her feel inadequate. So I stopped making dinner. She didn't like that I folded their laundry, said it was a boundary issue. So I stopped going into the laundry room. She didn't like that I left a photo of Jack on the hallway table, said it cast a shadow on their new life. So I moved it into my bedroom, then into a drawer, then nowhere. Each time I told myself it was temporary, that they were newlyweds adjusting, that it wasn't personal, but it was. Every silence, every look, every closed door, it was a message. And I read it. I just didn't want to believe it. The house I once filled with music and toys and stories became a place where my footsteps felt too loud. I started wearing slippers so the floors wouldn't creak. I tiptoed around their moods. I waited to use the bathroom until she was done curling her hair. I asked permission to have Janine over for tea. I had built that house. Every nail, every wall, every room, it was mine. And somehow, I was the guest. They told me it was just until they got on their feet, that they'd pay a little rent help, out with groceries, take over the bills. It sounded generous at first, and maybe it was, but slowly the mail started arriving in their names. The mortgage statements, the water bill, even the coupons from the local pizza place. The house was shifting, legally, emotionally, spiritually, and I felt it like a tremor before the quake. Still, I told myself this was what family did. We evolved, we made room, we sacrificed, because that's what I believed in, sacrifice. I believed that if I gave enough, loved enough, bent enough, something would be returned. Not money, not favors, just grace, just continuity, just the simple human promise that if you give your whole self, someone will keep you close, not shut you out. I didn't know then that I was giving away more than space. I was giving them a map of where to hit me hardest. And they used it. It was hard to say exactly when things started to go quiet. There wasn't a single moment, no loud declaration or final fight, just a slow dimming of presence, a pulling away so gradual it felt like forgetting a scent you used to know by heart. David stopped calling me Ma one day. It wasn't a correction, just a shift. He was stirring his coffee, reading something on his phone, and he said, "Mother, can you pass the creamer?" I paused, not because the word was foreign, but because it wasn't mine. Mother had formality in it, distance, like I'd been promoted to a ceremonial title with no power behind it. After that, I noticed his words were always clipped. Polite, sure, but trimmed of softness. We no longer spoke in stories or half-remembered jokes. We spoke in logistics. What time is dinner? Did the mail come? Do we have vinegar? Even meals, which once held some rhythm to our lives, began to lose color. He and his wife, Mara, started eating in their room more often. Said they were watching a show together. I'd knock gently and leave a plate on the hall table. Sometimes I'd find it untouched hours later. Sometimes the food would be scraped into the trash the plate washed and stacked as if it had never existed. I told myself they were tired, busy. That married life took adjustment. But there was an ache under my ribs that grew sharper each time I set down a dinner that no one asked for and no one thanked me for. They used to ask me to watch the baby, their daughter, Lila. For the first few years, she was my sunshine, sticky fingers and lullabies. She'd run into my arms when she woke up from naps, ask me to braid her hair before school. She'd sit on my lap while I told her stories about Grandpa Jack, the rooftop giant. But then Mara started using the word boundaries again. Said Lila was confused about who the parents were, that she needed consistency. I stopped getting asked to babysit. Then I stopped being told when they left the house. I remember walking into the living room one morning and seeing Lila already buckled into her car seat, waving goodbye through the back window. Mara didn't look up. David gave me a nod. That was it. They left without saying where they were going. When I asked later, David said, "You don't need to know everything, Mother." I stood there in the hallway, trying to remember if I had done something, if I had crossed a line. I replayed conversations, gestures, even looks. I watched myself in my memory like a suspect in an interrogation room, but all I found were small offerings, cups of tea, folded laundry questions about their day. That's when I realized they didn't want me here anymore, not just in the house, in their life. The home felt colder, even when the heat was on. I started keeping a blanket around my shoulders, not just for warmth, but for protection. I stopped going into the common spaces unless I had to. I read more. I sat on my bed with the door closed and listened to the television murmuring through the walls like a language I'd once known but could no longer translate. I noticed they stopped locking their bedroom door at night. They didn't need to anymore. I wasn't a part of their world. I was a fixture, like the coat rack or the dusty lamp by the stairs. One day I found a letter on the kitchen counter. It was from a real estate agency, open, like they didn't even bother hiding it. It mentioned refinancing options, equity maximization. My name wasn't on it, just his. I didn't ask. I wish I had. But at the time, I told myself it wasn't my business, that if something serious was happening, they'd tell me. After all, I was the matriarch, the one who had held this family up like scaffolding for decades. They wouldn't exclude me from something that mattered. I kept thinking back to last Thanksgiving. It had been strange. The turkey was dry. No one touched the mashed potatoes. Conversation was brittle. I asked Lila what she was learning in school, and Mara said she's not really comfortable with open-ended questions right now, like I was an intruder in a fragile experiment. David barely looked up. His plate was barely touched. At the end of the meal, he stood up stretched and said, "I think we're going to call it early. No family photo, no pumpkin pie, just the sound of chairs scraping back and shoes on hardwood floors." I stood in the kitchen, scraping half-full plates into the sink, watching the light over the dining table flicker like it was trying to warn me. The next morning, they didn't mention the dinner, didn't thank me, didn't ask if I had leftovers. It was like the night hadn't happened at all. And that's when it truly hit me. I was fading. Not in health or mind, but in relevance. They didn't hate me. That would have required energy. They had simply removed me, like clearing clutter. But people aren't clutter. We carry memories in our hands, in the meals we make, in the names we answer to. When someone stops calling you Ma, they aren't just choosing a word. They're cutting a thread. And when enough threads are cut, the whole fabric unravels. The letter came on a Thursday. Plain envelope. No return address. I thought it was junk mail at first, maybe one of those fake sweepstakes or reverse mortgage scams they target to people with silver hair and single-family homes. I almost didn't open it. I wish I hadn't. Inside was a document, neatly formatted, printed on thick paper. The heading read, "Transfer of Ownership, Voluntary Gift." There were numbers, parcel ID, legal jargon, declarations of intent. At the bottom, a signature line, except I hadn't signed it. My first instinct was to believe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had sent it to the wrong person. Maybe there was another Mary Whitaker with a son named David. I laughed out loud, the sound brittle in my throat. I held the paper closer, squinted at the details. It was my address, my son's name, my full legal name, my birthday, my signature. The room tilted slightly. I had to sit down. My signature wasn't even recent. It looked like it had been pulled from something, a birthday card maybe. One of those messages I used to write in loopy cursive, "Love, Mom." The kind of thing you write 1,000 times without thinking. They'd taken that softness and turned it into consent. The document claimed I had gifted the house to my son 6 months ago. No mention of an attorney, no mention of witnesses, just a neat, sterile sentence that said I'd relinquished all claim to the property for the purposes of estate simplification and family cohesion. I stared at that phrase for a long time. Estate simplification, family cohesion. I thought about the weeks leading up to that date. Had anything happened I couldn't remember? I had been tired, sure, working part-time at the clinic, managing my blood pressure, going to physical therapy. But I hadn't been confused, not disoriented. I knew what was mine. Still doubt crept in. Maybe I'd signed something I didn't understand. Maybe they'd asked me to. Maybe it was in one of those conversations where Mara was holding the baby and David was reading off bullet points from his phone. Just sign here, Ma. It's nothing major. But I would have remembered, wouldn't I? I stood up, grabbed my old fireproof lockbox from the closet. The one with all the important documents, the deed, the will, insurance, birth certificates. I kept it organized like a librarian. I prided myself on that. But the folder with the house documents, it was gone. Not misplaced. Removed. My breath went thin. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt the paper in my lap like it weighed 50 pounds. My ears rang. My fingers tingled. I texted David, "Can you come home early? I found something strange in the mail." No reply. I called. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Same. I paced the living room for over an hour. I kept thinking about the creaking floorboard near the hall closet, the one he used to jump over when he was 7, calling it the lava plank. I thought about the stain on the ceiling from the storm in '02 and how we patched it together, laughing with soggy towels. I thought about how many times I'd scraped my knees in that house, stubbed my toes, danced alone when no one was watching, and now it wasn't mine. It had never stopped being mine. But on paper and ink, I was gone. I called the number on the letterhead. The real estate attorney's office. A woman with a tight voice said they couldn't disclose details to non-clients. I said, "This is my home." She said, "Not according to the documentation." She hung up. The air felt thick, like trying to breathe through soup. I walked outside and stood on the porch, looking out at the lawn I'd trimmed for 30 years. The azaleas I planted for Jack. The maple tree I wrapped in lights every Christmas. I felt a sudden urge to scream, to rip the letter in half, set it on fire, dig up the roots of that tree, and fling them through David's window. But I didn't. Instead, I went back inside, pulled out my old filing cabinet, and searched for something I hadn't looked at in years, the trust. Back when Jack died, a neighbor advised me to set up a living trust. I couldn't afford much legal help then, but I managed to get a basic version drafted. It named me as sole trustee. It specified that the house couldn't be transferred without my explicit notarized permission, and that any such change would require me to be of sound mind with documentation. I found the paperwork in a yellowing folder rubber band, nearly fossilized. But it was there, my handwriting, my notary seal, my safeguard. I cried then, not out of relief, not even out of hope, but because it felt like maybe, just maybe, I hadn't been completely blind. That some small past version of me had thought to leave a light on for this future one. The next day, I called a lawyer, a young woman named Janelle, with a calm voice and fire in her belly. I showed her everything. She scanned the papers, her eyes narrowing. This was fraud, she said flatly. They used a facsimile of your signature. That's illegal, and your trust preempts this. She paused. Do you want to press charges? I didn't answer right away. I thought about David's face, his first steps, his first heartbreak, his wedding day. I thought about the way he used to lean into my hug with his full weight, trusting I would hold him up. Then I thought about the new deadbolt on the front door and the man in the blue polo who told me this residence has been reassigned. I looked at Janelle and said, I want to take back what's mine, with dignity. The confrontation was not loud. It wasn't cinematic or stormy or filled with tears. It was quiet, heavy, like the stillness before a burial. I showed up at the house, my house, at 7:12 a.m. on a Wednesday. I chose the hour intentionally. I knew Lila would be at school. I didn't want her to see it. Some part of me still ached to shield her, even if her parents had long stopped shielding me. I wore a navy cardigan, one of the few pieces of clothing they hadn't boxed up when they cleared out my bedroom. I had my documents in a manila envelope tucked under my arm, my purse slung over my shoulder like armor. I didn't ring the bell. I knocked, firm, deliberate, like someone who still remembered where every creak and echo lived inside that house. It was Mara who opened the door. She blinked at me like I was an apparition, like seeing me there, standing tall, wasn't part of the morning script. Is David here? I asked. She didn't answer right away. She looked behind her, then back at me. What are you doing here? I held up the envelope. I'm here to return what never belonged to you. Before she could protest, before she could launch into whatever line she'd prepared, emotional manipulation, wounded confusion, feigned civility, David appeared behind her coffee mug, in hand, face, unshaven, barefoot. For a second, he looked 12 again. I saw it. I saw it before it vanished. Ma, he said, but the word felt foreign on his tongue. You can't just, I interrupted, and I am. I stepped forward, not into the house, just enough so that they could see my eyes clearly. You took my home, I said, piece by piece. You erased me from my own life, and I let it happen because I believed that love meant sacrifice, that if I stayed quiet, you'd remember who I was. But you didn't, and now I do. David opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. I have the trust documents, notarized, original, filed before any of this began. What you filed, what you signed, with my name, was fraudulent. A scan from a birthday card. I know it. My lawyer knows it. The notary knows it. Mara shifted her weight. Her lips pressed into a line. I'm not pressing charges, I said, but I'm taking the house back. Today. David's coffee mug trembled slightly in his hand. You think this was easy for us, he finally said. You think we wanted to do this. You're always hovering, always in every corner of the house. There's no space to breathe. I felt something break inside me, not pain, not shock, just clarity. You asked to live here, I said softly. You said you needed help, a place to land. I gave you that. I gave you everything, He looked away. Mara crossed her arms. I don't need an apology, I said. I don't need your reasons. I don't even need you to understand what you did. I just need you to leave. They didn't move. I opened the envelope and pulled out the letter from Janelle, the formal notice of eviction, executed under the authority of the trust. It gave them 72 hours to vacate. It had a court stamp. It had weight. David stared at the paper like it might dissolve if he didn't blink. You can fight it, I said. You can drag this out, but I won't be moved again. Not by your silence, not by your justifications, not by your shame. I took a step back. You have until Friday. I turned and walked down the porch steps slowly, each step deliberate. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence behind me was its own answer. Back in the car, I sat with my hands on the wheel, staring at the house I built, the house I bled for, the house they tried to make me forget. I didn't cry. I thought I would. I thought there'd be a great sob, a scream, a cinematic collapse, but there wasn't. There was only the sound of my own breathing, steady and low. There was only the image of that door still closed and the faint echo of my own voice saying, I'm taking back what's mine. That night, I went back to the condo I'd been renting. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, thin walls, a view of the parking lot, but it smelled like lemon oil and had a tiny balcony that caught the morning light just right. I lit a candle, made myself tea, sat at the small round table with the eviction notice folded neatly in front of me. I felt no triumph, no gloating, just something deeper, heavier. Peace. The house was quiet when I returned. 3 days had passed. I waited until Saturday morning, just after sunrise. I didn't want to see them pack, didn't want to hear the rustling of boxes or the heavy scrape of resentment as they closed the door behind them. I'd had enough of their noise, not in sound, but in presence, the kind that lingers even when no one is speaking. The key still fit. When I turned the lock and pushed the door open, it was like walking into the aftertaste of someone else's conversation. There were empty hangers in the hall closet, a faint smell of citrus cleaner, the family portrait from 5 Christmases ago, the one I had framed, was gone from above the mantel. Just 4 faint nail holes remained. I walked through, slowly, touching nothing. The kitchen was stripped of life, counters wiped bare, cabinets half open, as if someone had gotten impatient or careless. The fridge hummed. There was a bottle of oat milk left behind, and a note on the kitchen table in Mara's handwriting. We didn't mean to hurt you. We thought we were helping. No signature, no apology, just a sentence. Cold and vague, like a stranger describing a storm after the damage was already done. I tore it in half, then in half again, dropped the pieces in the trash with quiet precision. The upstairs was just as they left it. Lila's old room was empty, save for a pink ribbon caught in the window frame. I held it in my hand for a long time before tucking it in my pocket, not as a keepsake, just as proof that something soft had once existed here. In the master bedroom, my bedroom, the furniture was still there. They hadn't taken the bed, the dresser, the lamp with the loose cord, but the walls were stripped of every photo, every memory. My comforter was in the linen closet, folded, smelling faintly of lavender. I opened the window, let the morning air in. It was crisp, clean, unsentimental. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a long, slow breath. This was still my house, not because a judge said so, not because a trust protected it, but because I knew every inch of it, every creak in the floorboards, every patch of paint I'd rolled on in sweat and exhaustion, every moment I'd swallowed so my children could feel safe here. But I was different now. I didn't want to live in the echo of a memory. I didn't want to walk these halls and wonder what corners still remembered me or what corners never did. So I made a decision. I spent the next few weeks packing what mattered: my mother's porcelain bowl, Jack's watch, a few books with notes in the margins. I sold the rest. I contacted a realtor, told her I wanted to list the house quietly, discreetly, no fanfare. She asked why. Because I've already said goodbye, I told her. I'm just waiting for the world to catch up. The house sold in 2 weeks. A young family, newlyweds, expecting their first child. When I met them during the final walkthrough, the wife touched the wall and smiled. "It feels warm," she said. I wished them love, but I didn't tell them the history. They'd write their own. With the money, I bought a small condo on the other side of town, 2 bedrooms, south-facing windows, no yard to mow. I planted tomatoes in pots on the patio. I painted the walls a soft green. I framed a photo of me and Jack, just us, at Coney Island in '82. We're holding ice cream cones. His has already melted down his wrist. I'm laughing. I volunteer now, twice a week at the hospice. I read to the patients who can't see anymore. I hold hands with the ones who are afraid to sleep. I don't talk about my past. They don't ask. We sit in silence a lot, and somehow it feels more human than any conversation I've had in years. One afternoon, as I was leaving, one of the nurses handed me a letter. No return address, no stamp, just my name in David's handwriting. Inside was a short note. Lila asked why she doesn't see you anymore. I didn't know what to tell her. That was it. No mention of the house. No mention of the locks or the forged signature or the man in the blue polo. Just a sentence. Fragile, unsure, reaching. I didn't write back. Not yet. Maybe I will someday. But for now, I am living. I wake up without dread. I walk to the corner cafe, and the barista knows my name. I listen to birds I never noticed before. I read books, slowly, underlining the parts that feel like truth. I'm not healed. Healing isn't a destination. It's a quiet choice made every morning when you put your feet on the floor and say, I'm still here. They locked me out of a house, but not out of myself. And now, finally, I've come home. I didn't expect the silence to be so loud. After the house was sold and the papers were signed, after the realtor shook my hand and said, congratulations, I stood outside that old porch for the last time and felt nothing, not relief, not closure, just a clean, dry space inside me, like a wound that had stopped bleeding, but hadn't yet begun to scar. The new owners had already begun to repaint. I saw swatches of color taped to the windows, eggshell dove gray, something called whispering sand. I almost smiled at that. This house had been anything but whispering. I walked back to my car with slow steps, glancing only once over my shoulder. No dramatic pause, no final bow. I just drove away the gravel, crunching beneath the tires, like a quiet applause for a performance that had gone on too long. That night, I unpacked the last of the boxes in my condo. There wasn't much. I'd left most of it behind. Objects carry stories, and too many of mine had chapters written in bitterness. But I kept the chair. It was an old wingback, frayed at the edges, the kind of thing Mara would have called an eyesore. It was where Jack used to read the paper, where David once fell asleep on my chest with a fever, where I sat countless nights waiting for someone to come home. I placed it near the window, facing the sunrise. I made tea, curled up in it, with a wool blanket and let the light spill over me. I thought about David often, not with longing, not even with anger, with understanding. He hadn't become cruel overnight. No one does. It had been a slow, rot selfishness disguised as self-care detachment, dressed up as boundaries. I'd watched it unfold and mistaken it for maturity. I'd wanted to believe he was still the boy with the scraped knees and sketchbooks. But boys grow into men, and sometimes men grow into strangers. I'd asked myself 1,000 times what made him capable of doing what he did, of erasing me with a signature I never gave. And the answer I always came back to was this: I made it easy. I was so good at giving, I forgot how to keep anything for myself. I modeled a love that swallowed itself whole, and then I wondered why he thought it was normal to consume. But I wasn't angry with that version of myself. I was grateful to her. She survived. She stitched together a family from nothing. She endured, and now she was handing the baton to someone new, someone quieter, clearer, fiercer. A few weeks after the move, I saw Lila. It was accidental. I was walking through the park, coffee in hand, and there she was on the swing's hair, flying behind her like a banner. She was taller, maybe 9 now. Her laugh cut through the morning air like a bell. I almost didn't recognize her. But then she saw me. She froze mid-swing, slid off, walked toward me with those big searching eyes. "Grandma," she said. It hit like a drum in my chest. I knelt so we were eye to eye. "Hi, baby," I said. My voice cracked. She looked over her shoulder. David and Mara were on a bench deep in conversation. They hadn't seen me. "Why don't you live with us anymore?" she asked. I smiled soft and steady, because sometimes grown-ups make decisions that don't feel fair. But I'm okay, I promise. She nodded like she understood something she couldn't yet name. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a tiny plastic lizard, the kind you get from a vending machine. "For you," she said. I named him Toast. I laughed, real round laughter. I hadn't laughed like that in months. I took Toast and held him like a treasure. "Thank you, sweetheart." She ran back to the swings. I watched her go heart full and hollow all at once. David looked up then. Our eyes met. For a long moment, neither of us moved. His face didn't change. No smile, no wave. But he didn't look away, and neither did I. We stood in that stare, quiet as war. Then I turned and walked on Toast, still clutched in my palm. That night, I placed him on the bookshelf next to the photo of Jack, a new relic, a new thread. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't need to. I had learned something vital. When you reclaim yourself, you don't need validation. You don't need apologies or explanations. You don't even need closure. You just need space to grow. And I had that now. It's strange how quickly a new routine becomes a life. At first, I thought I'd always feel like a visitor in my condo, like I was borrowing time, renting freedom. But then the light started to feel familiar. The floor creaked in just the right places. I memorized the smell of my morning coffee as it filled the space, and slowly it stopped feeling like exile. It started feeling like beginning. I began doing small things just for myself. I bought a teapot shaped like a robin just because it made me smile. I started walking every morning before the sun crested the hill. I found a little bookshop with a cafe in the back where the owner let me sit and read for hours without asking if I planned to buy anything. Sometimes I'd write letters I never sent, to David, to Mara, to the woman I used to be. I'd write in longhand, slowly letting each word settle. I never reread them. I kept them in a box in the bottom drawer of my dresser, a box marked for letting go. Every now and then I'd wake in the middle of the night with the memory of that afternoon standing at my own front door, locked out sun, beating down my key, useless in the new deadbolt. It would catch me off guard, like a bruise I'd forgotten was there. But the ache softened over time, not vanished, but dulled, absorbed into the fabric of the rest of me. I started volunteering more, not just at hospice, but also at the library, helping adults learn to read. Grown men and women, ashamed of their gaps, sitting across from me with calloused hands and shy eyes. One man, Arthur, 63, wanted to read a bedtime story to his granddaughter. He'd never done it before. He wept the day he finished his first book aloud, and I wept with him. There's something holy in watching someone take back a piece of themselves. I understood that hunger, that quiet rebellion. I kept Lila's little lizard on my bookshelf. Every time I dusted it, I smiled. I hadn't seen her since that day at the park. David never reached out. I didn't expect him to. He had crossed a line most people don't come back from, not just in action, but in intention. I believe forgiveness is possible, but it isn't required. Peace doesn't always come from reconnection. Sometimes it comes from severance, from choosing not to reopen a door that led to pain. One afternoon, I received a call from a lawyer, not mine, but one handling David and Mara's affairs. They were filing for bankruptcy. The house I'd heard, through a mutual friend, had needed more repairs than they could afford. The new owners were suing them for failure to disclose plumbing issues. Mara had apparently started working nights at a hotel. David was between jobs. The lawyer was polite, cautious. He said David had asked him to reach out on his behalf, said he didn't have the words himself. I listened. I nodded. Then I thanked the lawyer and hung up. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel pity either, just distance, like looking through a window into a house I no longer lived in. The next morning, I went to the hospice early. One of my favorite patients, Mrs. Harlan, had taken a turn. She loved show tunes and hated morphine. I sat beside her bed, holding her hand, as the light from the window fell across her face, like a curtain slowly descending. She whispered, "What if I didn't matter?" I squeezed her hand. "You mattered to me," I said. She nodded, then closed her eyes, and that was it. I stayed in the room for a while after she passed. It was quiet, still. I thought about legacy, how we think it's built from monuments or titles or photos on a wall. But really, it's built from moments, from how you make someone feel when they're scared, from the way you hold a silence that needs holding. That's what I wanted to leave behind. Not a house, not a memory of bitterness, but a trail of moments that told the truth of me I loved, I endured, I reclaimed. That night I lit a candle and wrote one last letter. I didn't name it, didn't seal it. I folded it once gently and placed it into the for letting go box. Then I took the box, walked out to the patio, and watched it burn. The smoke curled into the sky, soft and slow. I stood there barefoot, feeling the ground beneath me, real solid, mine, not because I owned it, but because I had finally chosen it. Spring came quietly that year. No grand blooms or sudden warmth, just a slow loosening of the cold. The kind you don't notice until you realize you haven't worn your thick coat in days. It felt like the world was starting over, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel behind it. I had a rhythm now. Tuesdays were for the library, Thursdays for hospice. Mornings were for the garden boxes, tomatoes, rosemary marigolds to keep the bugs out. I kept the radio low, usually classical or old Motown, something that filled the air without demanding anything from me. And then there were the letters, not mine this time. Letters from people at the hospice who'd passed their final messages to loved ones. I helped transcribe them, sometimes dictate when they couldn't hold a pen. There was something sacred in that task. Words matter more when they're the last ones you choose. One day, while sorting through a stack of those letters, I realized I hadn't thought about the house in over a week. Not once. No dreams, no mental replays, no imaginary arguments. Just space. Like the scar had stopped itching. That night, I walked down to the little community board by the mailboxes. Someone had pinned a flyer, "Potluck night, bring a dish." I stared at it for a full minute before pulling a tab. I brought deviled eggs, my mother's recipe. A woman named Carmen said they reminded her of her grandmother's. We talked for an hour. I laughed. Not the polite kind, the gut-deep kind that leaves your cheeks sore. After that, I started showing up more, not just to events, but to people. I helped a neighbor fix her curtain rods. I taught a young girl how to sew a button. I hosted a tea for the residents who couldn't drive anymore. Little things, quiet things, but they made me feel visible in a way I hadn't felt in years. Then one Sunday, I saw Lila again. It had been almost a year since the park. I was coming out of the grocery store, my canvas bag full of lemons and yogurt and one small chocolate bar I hadn't planned to buy. She was walking in with Mara. She saw me first. "Grandma," she shouted. Mara froze. Her face drained, then flushed. But Lila was already running arms wide. I caught her mid-stride, lifting her up the way I used to when she was little. She smelled like strawberries and sunscreen. I wanted to hold her forever. Mara walked over, cautious, protective. "I didn't know you were in this part of town," she said. I smiled. "I live nearby." A pause. "Then she talks about you a lot." I looked at Lila, who nodded with bright eyes. "I miss you," she whispered. My throat tightened. I looked at Mara. "You have my number if you ever want to talk." She hesitated, then pulled out her phone. "Text me," she said. "Please." She needs to know her people. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A beginning, maybe. That night, I wrote Lila a letter, told her stories about when her dad was her age, the time he tried to build a spaceship out of cardboard and nearly set the backyard on fire. I included a photo of us from when she was 2, frosting on her nose, both of us laughing. I didn't mail it. I'd wait. But I'd written it. That was enough. I sat on my balcony afterward, the air sweet with night jasmine, stars, blinking overhead like they were watching gently. I sipped my tea and held the lizard toast in my palm. So much had been taken, but so much had been returned in a different shape, and I had learned finally to hold what was mine with an open hand. Not with fear, not with bitterness, just peace. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.